I used to live in this old house out in the countryside, kind of tucked between a bunch of trees and fields. It wasn't a working farm, but we had goats, a couple chickens, a few rescue dogs, and whatever other animals my mom had taken in at the time. She worked as a vet and basically ran a mini shelter out of our place, so it always smelled like hay and fur and whatever concoction she was mixing for sick animals in the kitchen. It was peaceful, but there was always something happening. Animals being dropped off, raccoons sneaking into feed bins, or tourists wandering down the hiking trail that ran behind our property. That trail was popular in spring and summer, hikers and birdwatchers mostly, and sometimes people would stop to wave if we were outside. I was a quiet kid, and I spent most of my afternoons after school hanging out in the old stable behind the house. That place was like my personal hideout. I had a stack of books in there, a sleeping bag, and a couple chairs I'd dragged in for comfort. It was where I could go to read and chill with the animals without anyone bugging me. Anyway, one Thursday, I remember it was a Thursday because I had a test that day I totally bombed. I got home from school like usual. I let myself through the side gate, backpack already half open, and was munching on a granola bar as I walked toward the stable. Normally, our dogs would be waiting by the gate or sprinting up the path to say hi. But that day, no sign of them. I called out and got nothing back at first. Then I heard barking, but it was muffled. It was coming from inside the stable, which was odd, because the dogs were never locked in there. I figured maybe my mom had put them inside for some reason, so I went over and slid the big wooden door open. All three of them came barreling out like they'd been cooped up for hours, tails wagging, tongues out, super excited. I checked the inside real quick. Nothing out of place. Just the usual hay bales, the water buckets, and the shelves of supplies. I assumed the wind had shut the door on them or something. No big deal. I plopped myself down on one of the hay bales inside with my snack and let the dogs circle around me, trying to sneak bites. That's when I saw someone walk past the open stable door. Just this lanky figure, kind of hunched over, with stringy gray hair hanging past his shoulders. He was muttering non-stop, almost like chanting, except it didn't sound like anything I could make out. He didn't even look in our direction, just kept walking, kind of drifting toward the chicken coop. My dogs barely reacted. That was the weird part. Usually they'd bark at anyone they didn't know, even our neighbor if he wore a hat they hadn't seen before. But this time, they just wagged their tails and went back to staring at my food like this guy was a regular. So I got up and crept toward the stable door to get a better look. I watched him lean over the coop like he was searching for something. Then I saw him pull out an egg, hold it up to his face, say something to it like he was talking to a baby or praying, and just bite into it, like whole, shell and all. I could actually hear the crunch from where I was standing. The yolk dripped down his beard, and he looked like he was chewing gravel. It was disturbing in a way I didn't know how to process at 10 years old. I guess the shock wore off suddenly, because I screamed, loud. He turned to look at me, face just coated in egg, pieces of shell stuck in his beard. But he didn't stop chewing. He just stood there, eyes locked on mine, and kept eating like I was the one interrupting his dinner. I ran. I mean full speed, dodging the dogs, up the porch steps, into the kitchen, and slammed the door so hard I felt the whole frame shudder. I locked it, then stood there trying to catch my breath, still hearing his strange muttering outside. I peeked out the window thinking maybe he'd left. But nope. There he was, standing in the middle of our yard now, eyes fixed on the back door, while our dogs licked his fingers like they were old buddies. I ran for the phone and called my mom at work. I was shaking so hard I could barely talk, but I managed to tell her someone was in the yard and I didn't know what to do. She told me to go upstairs, lock myself in my room, and hide until she or the cops showed up. I didn't argue. I heard him pounding on the back door before I even reached the stairs. Upstairs, I locked my bedroom door and squeezed myself under the bed, lying perfectly still. I could hear him circling the house, banging on windows, still muttering and occasionally yelling things I couldn't understand. It was like listening to someone try to summon something. I honestly thought he was going to break a window and get in. Time gets weird when you're scared like that. It felt like hours, but it probably wasn't more than 10 or 15 minutes before I heard police sirens and then shouting outside. I peeked out from under the bed and crept back down to the living room. My mom had just burst through the front door, and when she saw me, she basically tackled me into a hug. I was too shaken to care how embarrassing it was. The police had managed to calm the guy down and were taking him into custody. He hadn't actually done anything violent, so they weren't treating him like a criminal, but they said they'd be in touch once they knew more. A week later, they came back and told us the full story. Turns out, that man had been living in our stable, sneaking in at night and hiding out during the day. He was homeless, mentally ill, and had apparently gone off his meds. He wasn't trying to hurt anyone, just trying to survive the cold nights. The dogs had probably gotten used to him over time and didn't see him as a threat. My mom, being who she is, didn't press charges. Instead, she helped get him connected to services and even made sure he had a place to stay. She visited him regularly, helped him get back on his medication, and even gave him small jobs on our property. He eventually got stable housing, part-time work at her clinic, and a lot of support from people in town. He lived a surprisingly good life after that. We stayed in touch for decades, and he actually became a friend to our family. He passed away earlier this year, and we all went to his funeral. Funny how someone who scared me more than anyone else in my childhood ended up becoming part of our lives for so long. Life is strange like that. This happened back in early 2017, when I was trying to start over. I'd just left a big city on the West Coast, where I'd spent way too long tangled up with the wrong crowd and even worse habits. I ended up settling in this tiny, blink-and-you-miss-it town somewhere in Colorado, hoping the slower pace would help me figure my life out. Before I moved, though, I'd done a short trimming job in Northern California for this couple. He was kind of a control freak, always ranting about his plants like they were sacred, and she was this oddly spiritual type, always burning sage and going on about moon phases. I didn't care much for either of them, but they paid me fair enough for the season, and we parted ways, or so I thought. Fast forward a few months, and out of the blue, the woman messaged me asking if I'd be down to house sit for a couple of weeks while they went to Europe. Morocco, I think. They even offered extra cash to help trim some of the weed they still had left over. At that point, I was broke, in between gigs, and kind of desperate, so I said yes. I packed up, made the drive all the way back to California, like 16 or 17 hours, and told myself it'd be easy money. That optimism didn't last long. The house was secluded as hell, like the kind of place you wouldn't just stumble upon unless you were lost or up to something. They had a separate little unit on the property they called the gardener's quarters, and that's where I was supposed to stay. It had its own little kitchen, bathroom, and a door that connected to the main house, except they screwed that door shut while I was watching. Literally took a power drill to it while I was standing there. That should have been my first clue to turn around and go home. At first, everything seemed normal enough. I fed the dogs, watered the plants, trimmed a bit of their leftover stash, and just enjoyed the peace and quiet. But a few days in, I started hearing things, like the faucet running, a microwave door slamming shut, voices murmuring inside the house. The part of the house I was supposedly locked out of. I messaged them right away, expecting something like, "Oh yeah, the timer must have gone off," or "We forgot to mention the cleaner comes by." Instead, they said, word for word, "Don't worry about anything happening on the other side of the wall." That response sent a chill straight down my spine. Over the next few days, I'd catch more strange things, whispers, movement, a faint TV glow from under the door, and the dogs reacting like someone they knew was walking around inside. It wasn't like someone had broken in. No, This felt more like someone had never left. One night, I was outside having a smoke and heard footsteps circling the building. I played this dumb little trick, pretended to go back inside, slammed the door shut, but stayed hidden in the shadows. Not even 5 seconds later, I watched someone sneak out from the corner of the house, pause when they didn't see me inside, and then sprint back into the woods. That confirmed it for me. I wasn't losing my mind. Someone was living in that house while I was house-sitting, and I don't know if the couple was in on it or not, but their texts got weird. The woman would mention things I had done that day in a way that made it seem like she'd watched me do them. I tore that room apart looking for cameras but didn't find a single one. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling I was being observed the entire time. After that, I leaned into the weird. I started blasting bubblegum pop music, doing dumb dance routines in front of the windows, and rearranging stuff into bizarre patterns. I figured if someone was watching me, I might as well give them a show they'd never forget, or at least make them second-guess messing with me. It was some reverse psychology horror logic, but honestly, it kept me from totally unraveling. Eventually, the couple came back from their vacation, acting like nothing was wrong. They even hesitated to pay me, which was hilarious considering everything I'd put up with. I did get my money, but the whole experience stuck with me. Never again. The farm where my dad and I live is kind of in the middle of nowhere. We're about half an hour from the nearest city, and there's this rundown town a mile away that's basically all boarded up houses and gang graffiti. You can hear gunshots some nights, sometimes from way across the fields by the train tracks. Honestly, we've had our fair share of sketchy stuff happen out here, but this one night from a few months back stuck with me like nothing else. Something about it just felt way too personal. It all started on this one night in early fall when we were hanging out in the backyard. We had a little fire going. The sky was lit up from a full moon, and it was one of those rare nights where everything felt calm. Coyotes were howling in the distance, the air was cool, and the whole property was glowing under the moonlight. It was just me and my dad sitting there quietly, and for a minute, everything felt really peaceful. Then this old beater of a Chevy truck rolled up the road past our driveway and slowed down. I figured maybe the guy missed a turn and needed to flip around, but he kept creeping past the entrance real slow. Then he sped up again and disappeared down the road. Okay, whatever. But then he came back. And then again. Same exact truck, doing this weird loop that clearly involved taking a dirt road back around to our place. By the fourth time, my dad had enough and called the sheriff's office. They sent someone to drive around and, go figure, the truck vanished for a while. We figured that was the end of it. A weird night, but nothing serious. Except a week later, I learned that we were wrong. The layout of our land makes it easy to miss stuff if you're not paying attention. Our house is wrapped in tall bushes, and there's a small forest patch behind us, with a creek that snakes nearby, and some wetlands past that. The only real opening is the driveway, and even that's tucked back from the road a bit. So you can see how someone could creep around without being easily spotted. That evening, I was home alone, walking past the bushes and near the back of the pasture. That's when I spotted a blue F-150 easing down the road, and to my surprise, it turned right into our driveway. The guy didn't just pull in and back out like he was lost. He stopped, sat there. I don't know what it was, but something in me just locked up. I ducked behind a birch tree and kept my eyes on him through the leaves. Thankfully, I had my camo jacket and hat on from earlier, so I sort of blended in with the brush. He stepped out of the truck after a minute. Older guy, probably pushing 60, wearing a gray hoodie and jeans. He had this long hair that parted in the middle and just kind of floated back behind him. He looked around like he was searching for something. More specifically, like he was looking for someone. I crouched lower behind the tree and kept moving with it, staying on the opposite side every time he shifted. The whole time I had my knife with me, but even with that, I was just thinking about how to quietly disappear into the brush if I had to bolt. He wandered around the yard for a few minutes, turning his head every few seconds like he expected someone to pop out. But he didn't check the whole property. Eventually, he gave up, went back to his truck, and drove off like none of it ever happened. Afterward, I called my dad right away. When he got back, we went over to talk to our neighbor. He's a good guy who lives a little east of us and always keeps an eye out. He thought it might have been this guy in the area who's known for poking around people's property and stealing stuff. Maybe he was right, but something didn't sit right with me. I don't think he was just looking for stuff. I really believe he was looking for me. I still think about that evening, especially whenever I'm out back alone. I've gotten into the habit of checking behind me more than I used to. Out here, you expect coyotes to be lurking in the dark. It's the people watching from the road that really mess with your head. Back when I was 17, I had this part-time gig delivering pizzas at this old-school joint that sat right at the edge of town, kind of tucked away between the last strip mall and the farmland that spread out beyond the bypass. Our town had that polished suburban vibe, but right outside of it were these back roads lined with old trailers, barns, and dusty gas stations, the kind of places where guys in oil-stained coveralls would hang out after long shifts. The pizza shop I worked at was this no-frills kind of place that had been around forever and catered mostly to those folks. On slower nights, I'd be the only driver, and this one night in particular, that definitely wasn't working in my favor. It was just after 9 p.m. when a delivery order came in. 2 pizzas and a 2-liter soda headed out to some property about 10 minutes out of town. The GPS took me off the main road and onto this gravel driveway that felt like it went on forever, winding between tall wheat fields that nearly swallowed my tiny sedan whole. The place had a decent-looking house, 2 barns, and what looked like a few random metal structures scattered across the property. I'm not great with remote spots like that. They always mess with my nerves, especially when I'm out there alone, which I definitely was. After sitting there for a few minutes without seeing anyone come out, I figured I'd better call the number on the order. The guy picked up after a long pause, and his voice was rough and gravelly, the kind that made me think of someone who lived off black coffee and cigarettes. He told me to meet him at his truck near one of the barns in the back corner of the property. So now, I'm creeping further into this unfamiliar place, with tall grass brushing my windows and not a soul in sight, except for the faint outline of a truck near one of those giant silver grain silos. When I finally pull up, I stay in my car and call him again, hoping we could just get this over with without any weirdness. Instead, in that same gruff tone, he tells me to set the pizzas and soda on his truck bed. He'd already paid online, so I figured it'd be a quick handoff. But I had a receipt he needed to sign, so I walked around to the passenger side, hoping he'd just scribble something and let me go. That's when I got a good look at him, probably mid-40s, heavy-set, wearing a faded trucker hat and sporting a thick, scruffy beard. He just stared at me when I asked for a pen, and instead of answering, he nodded toward the back of the truck and muttered, "If you ask for a tip, I'll be shoving this tip down your damn throat." I glanced into the truck bed and saw it. An old double-barrel shotgun, just lying there like it was part of his toolbox. My whole body tensed up like my brain was trying to freeze me in place, but all I could think about was getting out of there without making things worse. I backed off slowly, muttered something like, "Okay, have a good night," and practically dove into my car. My wheels weren't made for gravel, but I pushed that car so hard I thought the bumper might fall off. I flew down that driveway, then onto the main road, doing at least 80 the whole way back to the shop. When I told the other guys what happened, they all laughed like I was trying to outdo some horror movie plot. No one believed a word of it. I kind of moved on eventually, but about a year later, that guy called in again and ordered during the lunch shift. This time, I flat out refused, but we were running on fumes, and the manager basically said we couldn't afford to turn anyone away. So I went. It was broad daylight on a Sunday, which helped a little, and this time, he was waiting at the front door instead of some creepy barn. When I pulled up, he came out before I even parked. He actually apologized. Said he'd been going through a nasty divorce back then and took his anger out on the wrong person. He handed me $60, told me he was sorry again, and I left without saying much, just glad that whatever that night had been, it wasn't about to repeat itself. A few years back, when I was still young and just figuring life out, I got married straight out of high school. My husband and I were both sort of drifting, not really sure what came next. We left college behind, packed up our tiny apartment, and thought we'd try something totally different before real adulthood kicked in. That's how we ended up volunteering on a rural property that was advertised as a kind of learn-by-doing homestead experience. The guy running it claimed he'd teach you carpentry, welding, construction, basically a hands-on crash course in trades, and in return, you just helped out around the property while living there rent-free. The photos looked like something out of a nature magazine. A big wooden house he'd built himself, with lots of space and a warm, cozy feel. He said he often hosted couples like us, had tons of experience, and we'd be part of a larger group learning and working together. All his listings mentioned we, like it was a whole team running the place, and the whole thing came across as polished and well-organized. After a few back-and-forth messages, we felt good about it and booked our flights. But when we showed up, there weren't any other volunteers or workers, just him. He was in his 60s, still very physically capable and sharp, and he welcomed us with this rehearsed charm that, while polite, didn't feel totally natural. One of the first things he said was something like, "I don't care about what someone's done in the past. I believe in change." At first, we just chalked it up to some folksy wisdom, and he took us grocery shopping and told us to grab whatever we wanted, which seemed generous, but also oddly performative. That's when we started noticing little details that didn't sit right. He had built the house entirely himself, and the upstairs bathroom, really the only one, was only accessible through his bedroom. Worse, the bathroom door didn't have a lock. Whenever he invited us into his room to talk or show us things, there'd be this old camcorder sitting on his table, and dozens of mini-tapes scattered around it. He kept bringing up how much he loved Japanese culture, how he specifically tried to bring in guests from Japan, and that several young women from there had stayed before, but left suddenly. He dropped these hints about former guests who got scared off or couldn't handle the work, and it didn't take long before we realized no one stayed very long. One day, out of nowhere, he said we were heading into the nearest city to do some errands. After the long drive, he suddenly asked us to help him find new help by approaching young adults downtown and inviting them to come back to the ranch. That whole thing made our skin crawl. It felt exploitative, and he got annoyed when we hesitated. We ended up pretending to go along with it, while he wandered around trying to talk people into coming back with him. As the days passed, his behavior started shifting. He became easily agitated, made passive-aggressive comments, and didn't seem to have any sense of boundaries. His views on women were outdated at best, and he'd often speak over me or make weird remarks that felt like they were meant to provoke. Physically, he was a big guy, ex-military, always pacing around with this calculating energy like he was planning something in his head. Looking back, I think he was always keeping tabs on us. Our families had been skeptical about the whole thing from the start, especially our parents. We brushed it off at the time, thinking we'd done enough background checking. What we hadn't done, though, was actually look up his full name. That changed one morning when I got a panicked email from my mom. She'd done a quick search and found multiple forums and articles warning people not to go there. along with an old arrest record tied to sexual assault charges from years ago. We went pale. We realized we'd been sleeping under the same roof as someone with a dark past, and now we had to figure out how to leave without setting him off. What made it worse was that he kept hinting about us staying permanently, even talking about future holidays together and raising kids on the land. We had never even suggested staying long-term, but he was already mapping out a whole life for us, like it was a done deal. I made up a lie about a family emergency back home, and the second I started talking, I swear he already knew. His face didn't move much, but something in his eyes shifted, like he was analyzing everything I was saying in real time. Before I even finished, he said, "All right, when do we leave for the airport?" No emotion in his voice, just cold and flat. On the drive, he switched back to his cheerful, generous self, like none of the past few days had happened. He said we were always welcome back, that he'd pay for our return tickets if we changed our minds. We left that day and never contacted him again. Months later, I searched his name again and came across an entire message board dedicated to warning others. Dozens of posts from people who'd stayed there, most of them couples, describing experiences eerily similar to ours. They mentioned the bathroom setup, the camcorder, the Japanese women, the ritual circles in the woods under full moons, and even the part where he tried to recruit strangers in the city. It was all the same. The cops couldn't do anything because no one had enough hard evidence, but the stories are piling up, and from what I can tell, he's still out there, doing the exact same thing.